The Colosseum woke up at dawn. Its arches glowed in the early light, while yesterday's violence still stained the stones. Under the seats, sellers shouted for business, their baskets of snacks and cheap wine ready for a crowd still finding their places. Iron gates shook as handlers forced hungry animals into position. Lions with bony ribs, elephants stomping in fear, panthers scratching at their cages. From the tunnels came the sound of swords clanging together, not for practice, but for the killing to come. And over it all, a low rumble grew. Thousands of Romans filling their seats, excited for the one thing their empire did best. Death, sold as a show. The arena wasn't just for games. It was a school for cruelty. Here, emperors showed their strength by flooding the ground for fake sea battles, by starving wild animals to build suspense, or by making prisoners act out myths that ended in real, painful deaths. These weren't mistakes. They were official plans, built into Rome's system of power. To cheer from the stands was to support the empire itself. And that's why today we're looking at the most brutal arena acts that went too far, even for Rome. From bloody funeral traditions to executions dressed as plays. We'll learn how a society built its name by turning pain into cheers. Before we start, make sure to subscribe. It helps us keep sharing history's darkest, weirdest tales and makes sure you see our next trip into the past. Now, take your seat as the gates groan open and the show begins. The first gladiator fight in Rome didn't start with celebration, or with emperors in fancy clothes. It started at a funeral. In 264 BC, the sons of a man named Brutus decided the best way to remember their father wasn't with statues or poems, but with blood. They got 3 pairs of slaves, gave them weapons, and made them fight to the death in a marketplace that smelled of dirt and smoke. This wasn't for fun. It wasn't duty, what Romans called a munus, something you owed the dead. The tradition was older than Rome itself. In other places, warriors were killed at graves to please the spirits of the dead. Slowly, killing turned into fighting. The dead didn't want just any victims, but the best fighters. The Samnites, old enemies of Rome, held these contests often, and Roman nobles copied the idea with excitement. It was one thing to bury a man with treasure. It was another to bury him with a bloody show that proved his family's power. But funerals were only the start. By the 3rd century BC, Rome's leaders saw these fights could do more than honor the dead. They could calm politics. Religious holidays, paid for by officials wanting fame, started featuring gladiators. The games for Jupiter, once serious events, now hosted fighters. The Senate called this religious respect, but everyone watching knew the truth. Government funded fun to keep the people happy. The weapons and armor themselves told a story. Early gladiators were often dressed to look like Rome's beaten foes. The Samnite with his big shield and helmet. The Thracian with his curved dagger. The Gaul with his long sword. To watch them fight was to see Rome's wins repeated, every cut on the sand reminding people of their empire's rule. It wasn't just death. It was a message, and the buildings grew as fast as the bloodshed. First, they built wooden stands for temporary shows. Later, these were replaced by stone amphitheaters, permanent churches of violence where crowds could gather. The games no longer belonged to families. They belonged to the state. Every drop of blood was another sign that Rome commanded not just armies, but death itself. Back then, no one in Rome could have known how big the games would get. What began as a sacred ritual became theater, and what started as duty became an addiction. Rome had found a new kind of power, control not just over life, but over what death meant. And once they learned that, the empire never forgot it. The crowd's roar wasn't only for gladiators. Sometimes it was for animals pulled from the very edges of the map. Creatures that should never have been in Rome. Lions from Africa, leopards from the mountains, crocodiles from the Nile, even tall giraffes brought over deserts. All marched into the arena, not as wonders of nature, but as targets in a huge killing display. Romans called these hunts. They weren't about food. they were about power. Staged proof that the empire could catch the wild and kill it for sport. Julius Caesar set the standard early. At his games in 46 BC, he showed a giraffe, the first one Europe had ever seen. Romans called it a camel leopard, because they didn't know what it was. The sad creature didn't last long. It was thrown into the arena to be destroyed, not to be looked at. For Caesar, the point was clear. If Rome could catch the strangest animals, then Rome could beat anything. The amount of killing was unbelievable. When the Colosseum opened in AD 80, Emperor Titus supposedly killed over 9,000 animals in one festival. Some were made to fight each other. Others were set against armed hunters. Scientists have found animal bones with signs of being starved on purpose. Proof that lions and bears were made weak before the fight, to make sure the bloodshed was quick. Even elephants, animals that had once scared Roman soldiers, were dragged into the sand and killed for cheers. The planning was part of the show. Exotic animals had to be caught, moved, and kept alive until their performance. Traveling groups crossed deserts with chained beasts. Ships carried cages on the Nile, and handlers risked their lives to deliver them. It was one thing to see a panther in the forest. It was another to see one jump from a cage before 50,000 screaming Romans. Each animal was a living trophy of empire, proof of how far Rome's power reached. Some emperors made the hunts about themselves. Commodus, who loved attention, walked into the arena dressed as the hero Hercules and killed hundreds of animals himself. He acted like a god among beasts, but was really just a nervous man with a bow. He even set up fake hunts where animals were tied up or hurt, so he would always win. The crowd cheered anyway, not because they liked it, but because they were scared. When the emperor hunts, you applaud. But under the noise was a sadder story. Old writers noted how some animals started to vanish from areas after years of Roman hunts. Damaging nature was the cost of fun. Creatures that once lived freely in North Africa were wiped out to feed Rome's hunger for blood. The Colosseum wasn't just a stage for death. It was a machine that broke the environment. For the Romans, though, losing species didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling of control. In a world where nature felt huge and wild, the arena made it a toy. Trap it, starve it, kill it. Every animal that died on the sand wasn't just a victim. It was another piece of the empire's wall of strength. The word gladiator might make you think of two equal fighters, skilled men dueling with honor for a loud crowd. The reality was much weirder and much more cruel. The Romans weren't happy with fair fights. They created unfair matches, made odd weapons, and brought in strange rules, all to make the bloodshed more interesting. Some gladiators didn't get a real chance. Prisoners and criminals were sometimes put in silly outfits, given fake swords, and sent to fight trained killers. The crowd laughed at their fear, making fun of the one-sided battles that ended in fast, shameful deaths. What seemed like a game was really a public killing hidden as fun. Weapons became their own characters. The net fighter, for example, used a net and a three-pronged spear like a fisherman. His enemy, the swordsman, had a short sword and a smooth helmet made to stop the net. The fight was less about talent and more about drama. Would the net trap him or would the sword win? Romans loved the excitement, even if the fights were more like fixed shows than real contests. The Romans also played with numbers. Some games had one gladiator against many. Others had whole teams set up like little armies, fighting in pretend wars for the crowd. Sometimes, hundreds of men fought on the sand at the same time, turning the floor into a mess of blood, broken shields, and dead bodies. The more chaotic it was, the more the crowd loved it. There were also gladiators who were different. Female fighters appeared in the 1st century AD, often used as unusual attractions. Writers made fun of the idea, but proof shows women fought with real weapons. Sometimes against small people, sometimes against animals, sometimes against each other. Their presence mixed up gender roles, but showed that no one was safe from Rome's hunger for shows. Even the helmets could be mean. Some were designed to block sight or hearing, making fighters move blindly while the crowd laughed. Others were so heavy that just lifting your head was a struggle. Armor wasn't just for safety. It was a disadvantage, another part of the show made for the crowd's enjoyment. And then there were shows of battles Rome had already won. Gladiators were dressed as foreigners, forced to fight in gear that represented beaten nations. When they lost, which was most of the time, the win reminded the people that Rome was always the winner. The fights were propaganda with sharp points. None of this was by chance. Every change, the unfair fights, the weird weapons, the mixed-up shows, all had the same goal: to keep the crowds wanting more, surprised, and in line. The Colosseum wasn't happy with the same old thing. It invented new cruelties, finding new ways to turn human life into fresh fun. And for the Romans, that endless imagination in killing was part of the appeal. By noon, when the morning gladiator fights were done and the crowd was getting bored, the arena changed. What came next wasn't a contest. It was a play where death was the main actor. Romans called it condemnation to the beasts. For the condemned, it wasn't a trial but a part they had to perform. The victims came from Rome's edges. Criminals, runaways, rebellious slaves, and captured soldiers. Their crimes were turned into symbolic punishments made to fit their wrongs. Thieves might be ripped apart by wolves, fire starters burned alive, traitors attacked by lions. Each killing was a moral story played out with real blood. The size could be huge. Under Emperor Trajan, while celebrating his win in Dacia, thousands of prisoners were killed over 123 days. The killings weren't random. They were planned, timed like scenes in a dark play. Each death made to keep the crowd watching until the next event. Animals were key to the show. Lions were starved until they were crazy before being let out. Bears were chained in holes and poked until they attacked. Even leopards, seen as fancy prizes, were set on people with no weapons. The uncertainty of the animals made each death horribly suspenseful. Would the lion kill fast or play with its food while the crowd yelled? Sometimes cruelty was dressed as myth. Prisoners were made to act characters from old stories. Orpheus torn by animals or Prometheus tied up while birds circled above. Mixing legend and killing turned punishment into a sick copy of theater. It wasn't enough for them to die. They had to die in a way that meant something, acting out Rome's stories with their bodies. The methods went beyond animals. Crucifixion, a punishment Rome took from the East, was often done in the arena. Condemned men and women were nailed to wooden crosses, their slow death happening while sellers sold drinks and kids played in the seats. Fire also had a part. A shirt soaked in flammable stuff was put on victims and set on fire, creating what one writer later called human torches. The killings were more than a blood sport. They were a message. By doing punishment in public, the state reminded everyone watching of its total control. Fighting back wasn't just hopeless. It was deadly, and it had an audience. Every victim in the sand was a warning written in flesh. This is what happens to those who challenge Rome. Not everyone was happy. Thinkers like Seneca said the brutality was wrong, claiming the midday killings left him feeling more cruel, less human than when he came in. But his voice was lost in the cheers of thousands who came not for justice, but for a show. In this theater of death, Rome mastered the skill of turning dying into a lesson. And every scream from the arena told the living who was really in charge. Rome wasn't satisfied with fights on land. Sometimes the emperors wanted oceans in the city. The mock naval battles were shows on a crazy scale, where water became another tool in Rome's theater of cruelty. Unlike gladiators, these weren't fights between champions. They were mass killings disguised as sea drama. Julius Caesar put on the first big one in 46 BC. He had a giant hole dug near the river, filled it with water and real ships. Thousands of prisoners were forced onto the boats, told to fight like enemy fleets. These weren't actors. They were doomed men made to serve, with no chance to live. The ships had weapons and soldiers, all using real blades. The result wasn't a play, but a fake war fought for nothing but cheers. Augustus, Caesar's heir, made it bigger. In 2 BC, he built a basin almost 2,000 feet long, needing its own aqueduct just to fill it. On its surface, 30 warships fought, each filled with men already sentenced to die. The huge size of the show made the message clear. Rome could create seas where none existed, turning nature into a prop for political theater. Even real lakes weren't safe. In the year 52 AD, Emperor Claudius used the water from a drained lake for a naval battle. The condemned men greeted him with the famous words that would be remembered forever. "We who are about to die salute you." Whether it was real or planned, the phrase captured the hopelessness of men sent to die as amusement. Fire had its own part in the arena. The flammable shirt was put on a prisoner and set on fire. Victims became human candles, stumbling in flames as the crowd roared. Sometimes these fiery deaths were dressed as myths. Hercules dying from a poisoned shirt or a hero burning his hand to show loyalty. The audience wasn't watching executions. They were watching plays told in screams and smoke. The Colosseum itself could be flooded. Old records say that under some emperors, the arena floor was changed to hold water for small naval displays. Engineers made drains and channels that turned the sand into a wet stage, letting tiny ships fight before the water was drained for gladiator battles the next day. Even in its design, Rome built cruelty like it was just another act. What connected water and fire was control. To make an ocean in the city or to turn people into torches was to show power over both nature and men. The emperors weren't just leaders of people. They acted like masters of the elements. By drowning, burning, and killing their prisoners, they created the illusion that Rome was godlike, able to command land, sea, and fire. By the late 1st century AD, executions were no longer just punishments. They were scripts performed with a twisted creativity that turned Rome's myths into a guide for torture. The condemned were forced to play parts from famous legends, with the cruel twist that the stories ended in real, bloody deaths. One of the first examples was at the Colosseum's opening games in AD 80. A writer describes a performer playing Orpheus, the magical musician who charmed animals with his music. In the myth, the beasts listened quietly. In the arena, it went differently. The actor played his instrument, but instead of being charmed, a bear was let out and killed him in front of everyone. Rome had twisted a beautiful story into a horrible joke. Another victim was made to play Daedalus, the inventor who flew away with wax wings. In the Colosseum, the prisoner came in on a fake flying machine, hung up to look like he was flying. The machine broke like it was supposed to, and he was dropped to the animals below. The writer joked that the men probably wished for real wings, showing that even Rome's poets made fun of the pain. Maybe the worst was the show of Pasiphae, the queen who fell in love with a bull. In one arena event, a woman, or maybe a man dressed as one, was put into a device that pretended her union with the animal, after which she was killed, mixing execution, shame, and adult entertainment. The myth that once warned about human pride became a live show of humiliation for the masses. Fire gave another way for theatrical cruelty. Victims wearing the burning shirt were cast as heroes who faced fire. Hercules burning alive or a hero scorching his hand to prove his loyalty. The actors screamed, but the crowd laughed, knowing these heroes were just criminals in costume. The theater of pain relied on this reversal. Gods and heroes turned to ash and spectacle. Theatrical torture extended Rome's need for control. By acting out myths with real victims, the state didn't just kill. It changed the stories. It took cultural symbols of strength, sacrifice, and defiance and made them into tools for mockery. Every myth performed in the arena became propaganda, pushing the idea that Rome alone decided what legends meant. To the watchers, these were breaks between more serious fights. To the victims, they were painful deaths in costume. To Rome, they were political theater, proving that even its mythology could be used as a weapon against the weak. In the Colosseum, myths weren't told with words or art. They were carved into skin, burned into bone, and cheered until the sand went quiet. If the arena showed Rome's thirst for blood, then the emperors made it a mirror of their own pride. Some rulers used the games as political tools. Others treated them as personal toy boxes. The line between ruling and obsession faded until the emperor's moods decided who lived, who died, and how. Caligula, known for his random cruelty, once ordered people from the audience to be dragged into the arena when they ran out of animals. People came to watch executions. They ended up in one. For Caligula, the line between viewer and victim was thin, and crossing it was part of the fun. Nero, obsessed with seeing himself as an artist, liked the stage more than the sand. But he still used the arena for cruelty, organizing shows that mixed plays with punishment. Prisoners were dressed as characters from tragedies, then killed in ways that fit their roles. Nero said it was art. His enemies called it insanity. Then there was Commodus, maybe Rome's most famous performer-emperor. He didn't just pay for games, he was in them. Dressed as Hercules, he entered the arena with a club and a bow. He killed hundreds of animals, often already hurt, to make sure he won. He even made the city pay him for his performances, wasting public money while soaking in cheers from a scared crowd. Commodus didn't stop with beasts. He fought gladiators too, but only in ways that guaranteed he would live. To lose was not an option. To clap was a must. Domitian, meanwhile, turned the arena into a show of his fear. He staged hunts and executions with extra energy, sometimes at night, lit by fire. By making the shows unpredictable, he kept people nervous, never sure when fun might become terror. For him, control was the best performance. Even emperors who seemed more calm couldn't avoid the pull of the show. Trajan, often called one of Rome's good emperors, celebrated his wins in Dacia with 123 days of games. The party included thousands of gladiator fights and killings, a sign that even Rome's kinder rulers measured success in blood spilled. The emperor's fixations show more than just personal quirks. The arena became a stage where leaders tested their public face. To pay for huge hunts was to show wealth. To kill with your own hands was to act like a god. To burn prisoners as human torches was to prove that power went beyond armies to the very idea of human worth. But obsession had a price. Emperors who loved the spectacle too much often lost the respect of the government, the money, or even the people. Caligula and Commodus both died violently, remembered not for ruling, but for their bloody plays. The arena that once made them powerful also showed their madness. For Rome's emperors, cruelty wasn't just policy, it was a performance. And in the Colosseum, the most dangerous role wasn't the gladiators, but the emperor's, when he thought he couldn't be touched. Not everyone cheered when the gates opened. For some Romans, the arena was less a sign of civilization's success and more a mark of its sickness. Thinkers, writers, and early Christians left behind words that show a different Rome, one that saw in the sand not honor, but decline. Seneca, the philosopher, said the games bothered him. After seeing a midday killing, he wrote that he left feeling more cruel, less human than when he arrived. To him, the arena didn't clean the soul. It damaged it, teaching people to see human pain as light entertainment. His words showed the darker side of the spectacles. The violence didn't stay in the amphitheater. It leaked into everyday life. Cicero, years before, had felt a similar worry. While he admired bravery in battle, he hated cruelty for no reason. Yet even he knew the political need to fund games, admitting that the people expected them as a sign of a leader's gift. His problem showed Rome's contradiction. To be good was to be weak. To lead was to feed the crowd's thirst for blood. Early Christians saw the arena as both a place of persecution and a test of belief. Men and women who would not give up their faith were thrown to beasts or burned. Their deaths became public fun. Writers called the games evil, naming them schools of cruelty. For Christians, every cheer from the seats was a reminder that Rome's empire was built on unfairness. The critics were right about the price. In money terms, the games emptied the treasury. By the empire's end, emperors spent all their money to put on shows big enough to beat the ones before. What once meant strength became a sign of fear, a way to buy loyalty in an empire falling apart. In culture, the love of spectacle made Rome soft. People who once honored army discipline now demanded free food and constant games. A writer made fun of this need with his phrase, bread and circuses. To him, the crowd's hunger for fun showed how far Rome had strayed from its old values. The end of the games matched the end of the empire. As money and land were lost, the ability to stage huge shows faded. Amphitheaters crumbled and the roar of lions was replaced by quiet. By the 5th century, when invaders broke the empire's heart, the Colosseum stood as an empty shell, still huge, but without its bloody voice. Yet, the moral questions never went away. Could a society that made cruelty normal really last? Philosophers thought not. And looking back, the game seemed less like a party for Roman power and more like a warning of how fast human worth can be sold for cheers. The Colosseum is still here today, wounded, but standing, a monument not to Rome's greatness, but to its loss of humanity. The Colosseum remains, its arches worn, its seats empty for ages, but the ghosts of its sand are still there. When you walk its passages now, you can almost hear the echoes, the sound of metal, the roar of animals, the cheers of 50,000 people together. It's easy to like the engineering, the size, the sheer dream of the building. Harder, but more true, is to recall what those stones were made for. Cruelty practiced again and again until it felt normal. Rome's arenas were never just about blood. They were about command. By making death into a show, the empire taught its people to see suffering as entertainment, to cheer for obedience, and to laugh at hopelessness. Every execution, every animal hunt, every staged story pushed the idea that Rome's power had no end. In many ways, the games weren't about the victims at all. They were about the audience and the empire's skill in shaping what that audience believed and felt. And that is the final lesson. The Colosseum tells us not only of Rome's genius, but also of its failure to see. A civilization that celebrated violence finally collapsed under its own weight, leaving behind ruins that tell a story both amazing and warning. So, what do you think? Which of these shows, animal hunts, mythical burnings, or the emperor's obsessions, shows the darkest part of Rome's spirit? Tell us in the comments below. If you like this trip into Rome's most brutal pastimes, please subscribe. It helps us keep finding history's weirdest and most shocking tales and makes sure you catch the next journey into the past. Until then, remember the Colosseum may be quiet, but the echoes of its cruelty remain.